The Old Grist Mill really has very little to do with traditional grist mills. It is just sort of there. It doesn't do what a grist mill traditionally does, which is grind grain. That's fine, I don't care about any of that. What I do care about is whenever the water wheel outside is being shown, it's like a paddle wheel. It sits in the water. Current pushes it, and that causes it to spin. But if you watch it, it spins in the opposite direction. There's a part of me that just says, oh, the animators didn't know what they were doing. I've thought about it a lot in the last couple years, and it might entirely be possible that that was an intentional choice, because so much of the series is very surreal.
The unknown is not a regular place. It seems to be a place in between life and death.
It is the perilous realm, the land of fairy, where mortals do not belong, but can travel for a time.
This show's aesthetic, if you could call it that, is kind of pseudo late 18th, 19th century. It doesn't set itself hard at any time, and it kind of crosses over in many different ways, but I guess that kind of makes sense based upon what the show is.
I kept thinking about Nathaniel Hawthorne and Edgar Allan Poe. Not anything specific, but just the atmosphere.
I think a lot of it comes down to the clothing choices and like the general technology. Like when they go into Pottsfield, you see like the turkey in his house, and he's just like, but like there's a hearth in the house for like cooking.
Washington Irving, I should say as well, Legend of Sleepy Hollow, definitely had to have been a little bit of an inspiration.
I also really like Wirt and Greg's designs because they don't belong in this world, and they're just two kids from like the 90s.
It's because it's like their Halloween costumes are just that.
But what is Wirt supposed to be? Like even he doesn't know.
No, he doesn't. No, he doesn't know. He's just like, just found some stuff and it's like, oh yeah, this will work, I guess. Which fits a lot with his character.
He can't commit to even being one thing for Halloween. It's part of his character.
I want to know how he keeps that Santa hat so pointy.
A pencil sharpener. He's got one in his pocket, and every so often he takes off his hat and just gives it a couple turns.
That is true.
Both of them have very distinctive hats.
The tea kettle isn't a hat, it's an elephant costume. Get it right.
That's right, it's a trunk.
It's a trunk, Waj, and that's a rock fact. At the beginning, he was just sort of like your carefree, whimsical child, and then as things get progressively worse, he's looking more to Wirt to provide guidance. At the same time that Wirt starts off as a focused character and then eventually just gradually becomes more and more diminished, with the culmination of him just literally giving up in the end.
And then Greg responds with being like, okay, I'll get us out of here then. You just rest here, I'll figure it out.
Wirt tries to assert himself as the responsible elder sibling multiple times, and clearly has a certain amount of resentment, unfounded just by the virtue of Greg's existence. The show doesn't really even touch upon that a lot, which I think is very telling to how common that sort of relationship is. As soon as he gives whatever that awkward song of explaining their relationship is, it's like, oh, okay, I understand what's going on here. Wirt learning to become more assertive and take the responsibility versus Greg, who starts off being whimsical, attempts to take the responsibility, and is like, no, turns out he can't because he is a small child.
The woodsman shows up quite frequently as kind of the other protagonist of the show, I think, where his story is directly tied to the beast. Throughout the series, we get hints about him, but then it's all kind of made clear in Songs of the Dark Lantern, where one of the people singing basically lays out how the beast works. He turns kids into trees of oil.
That's another really great thing that the show does, is its sound design is just top-notch.
There's songs that are in there for just a couple of seconds, under a minute, but they're just so memorable. There's Patient is the Night in Hard Times at the Huskinby. That tune as well is in Schooltown Follies. Before playing the Potatoes and Molasses song, the teacher is actually playing Patient is the Night.
I'd just gotten Potatoes and Molasses out of my head, and now it's back.
The reprise of Potatoes and Molasses in Latin, when Greg is straight up dying, that's just...
yeah.
That's a beautiful choice.
I think I read somewhere that potatoes and molasses is actually a disgusting combination.
I haven't tried it personally. I kind of want to now. But Greg wouldn't lie to me.
He lies all the time.
It's a rock fact.
Exactly. I do appreciate the inconsistency of what rock facts are, though, because sometimes they are true, and then sometimes they're not.
Beatrice is an interesting character. Very hashtag relatable. It is kind of a very generic trope. They're good intention, but they're doing a thing for the bad guy. They see the error of their ways. Either they reveal that they were leading them into a trap, or they don't, and there's conflict that results of that. What I failed to remember, I thought the Adelaide thing, that was a whole episode in and of itself, but it really just is thrown right at the end of Lullaby in Frogland.
There's so much build up to Adelaide, and then it happens shoved here at the end of this episode. Then it's over, and you only hear about Adelaide really like once afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
The whole deal with Beatrice kind of reminds me of a fairy tale, at least with like the scissors.
It has very like Hans Christian Andersen vibes. This very specific curse and this even more specific solution.
We see Beatrice in the intro, in human form. I also like how that's brought up. She's mentioning to Wirt to check the linings on clothing. He's like, wait, what? You don't wear clothes? And she's like, well, when I was a human. And it's like, what? I'm sorry, what?
Fred the Horse shows up for 2 episodes. It seems like he has a similar curse to Beatrice.
I think Fred's just a horse, personally. He seems very content being a horse.
There's one line that seems like Fred had more to him. He was like, oh, I'll never steal again. I'll get an honest job.
He could have been a horse thief, actually.
I would absolutely love if he was a horse thief.
Because that fits with, assuming that he is cursed, that curse seems to play out. Beatrice did some bad stuff to a bluebird and became a bluebird. Fred theoretically could have stolen a horse, then become a horse. The idea of stealing also fits in with his greedy kind of thing.
The frog basically is presented as a non-character throughout the entire show. And then Lullaby in Frogland happens, and then suddenly the frog can just sing. Greg and Wirt really don't question it. They just sort of are like, yeah, okay.
It's part of the fairy tale vibe. In fairy tales, characters always react to magic that way. Like, it's just an accepted fact of life.
Babes in the Woods is by far one of the darkest episode. The songs have this obviously like upbeat attitude, but I'm pretty sure most of them are in like a minor key. So it's like happy and it's uplifting, but also at the same time, there's this sense of like Greg drifting further and further from humanity, from life, something. He's drifting away from something.
Yeah, there's always a twinge of melancholy. Into the Unknown is actually where we get to see the real world. We're not exactly told what the unknown is. I mean, that's his thing. It's the unknown.
That's a very important part of why the show works as well as it does. It never explicitly comes out and says, this is what happens to these two.
Last year, I watched through this series with Oculus with my sister and my brother-in-law, both of whom hadn't ever seen it before. At the end of it, we each came away with a different interpretation of what happens at the end. It was all a dream, it was all a hallucination, whether it really happened. There is more evidence to substantiate it having actually happened. At the end of the day, that isn't the point. The point is that these two characters have fundamentally changed from the beginning of the series, and you can see that change instantly.
Jason Funderburker is both the best protagonist and antagonist of the series.
I do love that Wirt brings him up incidentally as a name, I think a couple episodes in, and just like, man, that jerk, and you have this image in your mind of just your stereotypical jock. And then he appears in the story and he's almost worse than Wirt. He has zero chance with Sarah. When I'm assuming Wirt's like 14. That's how you perceive things. It's hard to take a step back, really look at it and be like, hold on, what? Why was I even thinking that?
I really like the whole resolution. Wirt confronts the beast, is able to realize how the beast has actually just been tricking the woodsman.
I do love the line that he gives as he's like about to hand over the lantern. Wait, no, that's dumb.
Yeah.
What? Why would I do that?
I do really like that ending. Just the phrase, the loveliest lies of all, like, that's a really good line.
It starts off with the first part of that song, and it ends with the last part, or it like continues and you actually get to hear the complete song. Like the entire show has just been that song.
There's also something about just a frog playing a piano spinning through an empty void that it really sticks out in your mind. I cannot recommend Over the Garden Wall enough. It really is a fun ride the whole way through.
Oh yeah, no, definitely watch it. It's a great miniseries.
It's pretty good.
It is pretty good.
And Over the Garden Wall to the...